Welcome to Command Control Power, the longest-running Apple consulting podcast. For over 10 years, we've produced weekly episodes featuring epic tales of tech support and troubleshooting, discussions about managing our clients and businesses, and interviews with colleagues and vendors. For our pro listeners, we offer Patreon-exclusive shows. This private podcast feed is tailor-made for IT professionals looking for advice and guidance on the more challenging aspects of running your practice, working with your clients and employees, and managing your fleets of devices. For a modest monthly contribution, you'll unlock a world of deeper Apple expertise, meaningful connections, and a shared passion for Apple technology. Simply visit commandcontrolpower.com and click support. And now on to the show.
I had a client contact me and she uses the Google Calendar and she doesn't have it on her Mac. She just goes to the website and she had a number of calendars. She accidentally deleted one of her calendars. And did you know you can't get that back?
I guess I'm not shocked about it, but that is devastating. Wow.
Isn't that the craziest thing? It's what, 2024, isn't it, Joe? We're approaching an election year or election month.
Yeah.
And I confirmed with this with all the high priests and priestesses on Slack.
Wow.
And they all know about this. And even though she had Backblaze running, there's just no way. If it wasn't
on the Mac, then it's nowhere, right?
Yeah. There's nowhere to get that back.
Yeah, that's rough, man. Even if you have Backblaze and you have it on your Mac, it's not exactly easy to get back a calendar that's been deleted. It's not like there's an undo button. It's not back in the days. I don't even know if Time Machine has an interface for this anymore, but Time Machine used to let you say, let me go back and see my contacts the way they were a week ago or a month ago. Same thing, I think, with Calendar, but I believe that's not the case anymore, even with Time Machine nor Backblaze. And what you'd have to do is restore the local calendar database if you had it on the Mac, and take a bunch of steps to get it back. It's not like just plop it into place and you're done. You have to restore it in an offline way and then export it and then re-import it and then get it back into the syncing. Yeah, it's really tough. I had the same thing with someone reached out about Gmail drafts, and apparently Gmail drafts can just disappear. It's a known bug, or maybe there's a reason that causes it. But if you're just dependent on Gmail for everything, the web-based Gmail, you can't get those back either. So yeah, you're out of luck in those cases. That's really tough. I don't know what I would do if I lost my calendar.
Yeah, I at first I was incredulous. I'm like, what? No, this can't be. Let's roll up our sleeves. Let's go to some hidden folders and let's pull this thing in. Whatever it takes, because she would have paid whatever it took.
Right.
And I'm surprised it never came up on the show.
Right.
That's all I got to say about that.
Yeah, that's a tough one, man. I don't have anything for you. I wish I did, but it sounds like you've already confirmed that's the issue. And yeah, that's a tough one. That's really tough. What's the answer? What's the best practice? Have it configured on a device at the very least, right?
Unless one of our listeners knows of some sort of cloud-based service that can do this.
Yeah.
And recover the calendar a bit. You're right. Yeah. Have it running silently and configure it in Apple calendars.
Right. At the very least. And have that backed up also.
Yeah. Yeah, of course.
Yep. Yeah.
Of course, backup's good.
Yeah.
Backup's good, except when you can't recover, it doesn't work. Yeah. Anyway, I don't want to dwell on this, but I just couldn't wrap my head around it.
Yeah, it's a tough one. I don't like when people lose data like that. Well, I have an update on a saga of a client that I had shared on the show a while back. And Jerry, this is the client that you were just amazed to learn invested in not one, but two UniFi mission critical switches at $1,000 a pop. And only to find out that the first sign of a storm, the threat of lightning, caused the whole network to fall apart. And so there are a few updates on that. So first of all,
but before you begin, how good I am in interrupting you. This was the woman who said that, it's in my job description. She said that she had like a wonky electrician, right? Where things, and the electrician admitted the same thing.
On his way to retirement, and his brain is already on retirement, it sounded like. And so she said that going in, and she said we used him for a long time. He's nearing retirement, and Do you have anybody? Can you guys take over the Sonos and things that he was doing and the network wiring and things? And we said, yeah, let's have your new AV company that we recommended that was a good partner of ours. Let's have them do all the wiring. Let's have them handle the Sonos upgrade. And we're going to take care of the network stuff, but they're going to do the network wiring because they just have a team of people and they specialize in that and so on. So we agreed on that sort of playbook. The way it actually played out was that they were there to do the wiring and a bunch of other things in the Sonos. And the electrician who was, heading toward retirement, for whatever reason, ended up, insisting or offering, and she accepted, whatever the situation was. He did the wiring and he did the Sonos upgrade. Now, the guy's an electrician, right? So at the very least, you you're laughing. Yeah. So this is, you have to laugh, right? Because what happens was, they have a generator. So the whole backstory of my saga here was that we installed this quote unquote bulletproof network. And the issues that they had been having were that they needed better protection from power outages. So they needed they needed better protection against just network interruptions. They kept having issues where a segment of the network would go down. And we ultimately figured out that the old Sonos devices, it used to be best practice to have them all just be wired, right? And if one of them has to be wireless, or if any of them have to be wireless, you make those wireless only, and you ensure that there's only one Sonos device that's wired, that has wireless enabled. And that would allow the wireless only Sonos to connect using Sonos Net to the one that's acting as the bridge to the real network to the rest of the Sonos devices. So we tried to jump through those hoops, but this other person was managing it and it really wasn't getting done properly. So we said, you've got to replace these devices with new Sonos equipment that can all be wired. And the new Sonos equipment can also be connected by Wi-Fi. So if it doesn't have a wiring location, it can be on Wi-Fi, not using the Sonos net, but using just direct Wi-Fi. So that's why you need to replace the Sonos devices. Also, the wiring needs to be redone. We have 2 cables going here that are not reliable. We have some devices that are plugged into 2 different cables, creating a loopback. The Sonos, the reason that's best practice for Sonos devices is to avoid a loopback, where a Sonos will connect over Wi-Fi and then send an uplink back into the network over the wired connection, which is not supposed to happen, but sometimes does because of STP settings and blah, blah, blah. There's my blah, blah, blah for the show. Yeah. So we had a bunch of stuff going on. So we said the electrician needs to handle the electrical stuff. The AV people are going to handle the wiring. They're going to label all the wiring. We're going to come in and basically plug and play. And they're going to replace all the Sonos, and they're just going to take over the management of the Sonos. So what ended up happening was the electrician did the wiring himself, didn't label it, didn't do that correctly. We've come to find out. Replaced all but 1 or 2 of the Sonos devices. So she paid for all new Sonos devices, and ultimately 1 or 2 of them were not replaced. So sure enough, we have a loopback that's happening now at only one specific location where the old Sonos device is still there. Those are 2 screw-ups already from the top.
Well, did he take them home? What did he do?
I don't know. It's just one that didn't get replaced. I don't know if he didn't know it was there, or if he thought, I can't figure out the right model, or it's out of stock, or I don't really know, but it's just sloppy stuff that is half done in some cases. She was really annoyed about the wiring because this was supposed to have been wired like before this phase of replacing the network, or was supposed to be labeled and never got labeled. And he redid what he redid, also still didn't get labeled. So we're in there trying to figure out, where does this go? What's happening here? Why am I getting a loop back over here? Oh, it turns out both of these are plugged into the same switch. There's lots of just confusing stuff. Also, the other issue that I had was that when the power went out and the generator kicked in, we got this alert from the generator. We're running on generator power. The UniFi sends an alert saying, I'm not getting power. And I'm thinking, oh man, are these mission critical switches not generator compatible? Is that the issue? Did I screw up by recommending this expensive upgrade and supposedly going to work as a UPS for her whole UniFi network, and it doesn't support the generator? It turns out that, of all places, the network closet where all this equipment was not wired into the generator circuits. So when the house loses power and the generator kicks in, the automatic transfer happens. Those are some of the outlets that are just not getting power from the generator. So that was, again, blame the electrician. How'd
you figure that out?
So we found a new electrician. I had a referral from another AV person, different AV company, to 2 different electricians that he works with, that he highly recommended. I call them. I say to the client, we've got a lead here. We've got a couple leads. We're working on it for you. Neither of those people called me back. So I called them back a week later, leaving another message. Hey, I have some high-end residential clients. One of them needs an immediate solution here. Several circuits need to be wired, etc. Also, she has ongoing needs. It's a very large home. Like, you'd think that an electrician would say, sounds like a good, lucrative, long-term client. Let me get back to you, at least to explore the opportunity. Didn't hear back from either of those two calls over the course of a week or 10 days.
Nice.
In the meantime, she found an electrician from a neighbor, and then she found another electrician from a neighbor. So she ended up scheduling with this kind of one person operation to come by like the following week. In the meantime, she had this other contact where they have a team of 11 people, made an appointment with them. So now she has two electricians that are both handling different aspects. So the first one comes in and he wires in the equipment to the generator circuit, and that's done. Just as simple as that. It took a week, but he comes in, he did it the same day. So that was of relief for me to realize that it just wasn't, those outlets were not receiving generator power. It wasn't that the mission critical switches were not compatible. So I'm hoping that issue is now fully resolved. Also, thinking back to, I think it was like 2 years ago, you had the lightning strike. Do you want to bring listeners up to speed on what happened there? And maybe they can refer back to that episode that I'll find real quick here.
Yeah, we have our house on a whole house surge suppressor, and I have my network cabinet plugged into UPS that's properly grounded. And we had a lightning strike and we lost internet, but most of the lights remained on. Some of our low voltage control panels got zapped. So I thought when the lightning struck, and it literally struck a tree right by our house, that it took out internet service, Comcast internet service. But after a little while, I discovered that wasn't the case. And come to find out, I look a little deeper and some of the Ubiquiti items were lighting up, but the Ethernet ports were not lighting up. So what happened was the current went into the ground, and even though we have the coaxial cable that drives the modem underneath the ground, underneath the driveway, current traveled on that coaxial cable, took out the modem and subsequently pieces behind it.
Yeah, including UDM gateway.
And the switch, and it stopped there. It didn't take out the access points, but...
Yeah, it's amazing. And sometimes there's nothing like a real world example to go through to say,
sure,
as we probably talked about on the show, you can speak from your experience now when you're trying to sell a client on proper surge protection and things like that. You can speak from your own experience. And we all learned something from that as well. That's in episode 495. Just Give Me the Good Support is the title. And that's where we talk about Jerry's lightning strike. And I believe that's where we talk about it. Yeah.
Actually, let me just interject there and just say, yes, it's a great selling point. But I've told this story, and I told it probably more often to my clients around the time that it happened. And it's like we discussed on another show. We didn't discuss this point. I was going to bring it up, and it's about, are your computers in compliance or not? Like, most people, they don't care. They don't care whether their modem's grounded or they're in compliance. We don't need stinking compliance.
Yeah.
It's just so hard to sell stuff, at least for me. I don't live in the fancy pants area that you live, you and Sam, where money is no object, and I'll buy not one, but two.
Oh.
How much do those...
Depends on the client. They're $1,000 a pop, the UniFi mission critical switches. And this is also, we talked about it in episode 492, Lightning, Not the Connector is the name of that one. So those are the two episodes where we talked about it. We even linked to some products that you recommended. And I guess the learning there was to add the coaxial surge protection, because that's just another kind of vector of lightning ingress into your home. Yeah, coaxial surge protection. I think you even added Ethernet surge protection as well.
That's right.
To stop that from coming in if it does make it into the modem somehow, to then stop it from traveling through. And obviously surge protection on the whole home. So now remind me, you just said you had surge protection in the whole home. Like you had some device connected to the circuit breaker box that was already providing surge protection?
And that was, this is a home that we purchased some time ago, 4 years ago, 5 years ago. And it was just something that was there. I didn't pay much attention to it, but obviously it worked. Because otherwise, a lot of things would have, a lot of things would have blown up, because it was a big strike, and it visually it took it ran a channel down the tree. It was pretty impressive.
Yeah, it was pretty impressive. I think we might have shared that photo somewhere along the way, but yeah, that was an interesting, quite was probably quite a day for you dealing with the aftermath of that. And like I said, we learned something. And so this was in the back of my mind when I was having these client issues where they had clearly there were a couple of bad storms. They had a lightning strike. It took out some of the equipment in their home that was not related to the network, not even connected to the network, like a gate control device that actually physically plugged into the network, I believe. And so the learning there was there's probably an issue in the home, like bad grounding, a lack of surge protection. So I was thinking about this. I asked this AV consultant that I had mentioned, and he said that he did something similar to what you did in his home. So he added better grounding rods, like so that the way that your home gets that grounding, the way that grounded outlets work, that third prong is actually wired into the physical ground. That's why they call it the ground. It's a channel for the current to travel that lets it travel into the ground rather than going through your body or through your equipment. So proper grounding needs to be there. That's really a prerequisite to have good grounding rods physically driven into the ground. And you have to assume the house has that, but I just wonder if during some of the electrical upgrades, in quotes, maybe that got disconnected, or maybe the wiring is bad that actually runs to those grounding rods. Maybe the grounding rods are old and corroded or something like that. I don't know if those are the kinds of issues that they have, but it seems like it couldn't hurt to put in to check the grounding and reaffirm that's working, or maybe put in new ones, and also to add whole home surge protection. So this AV consultant said he did both of those things for his home. He had been having issues like you had where, you'd have a bad storm, lightning would take out some piece of equipment. He'd have, regular issues. And since doing those two things, putting in new grounding rods and adding whole home surge protection, he has not had an issue. So I took that as that combined with your situation. I brought that to the client and I said, I think you're having electrical issues. This goes beyond what we normally handle, but clearly it's now coming into effect in our world with the network. It's taking out network equipment. And so you need to have an electrician handle this. Obviously the one you have has not been taking care of this. So here's the playbook for the new electrician coming in to improve this system by adding a whole home surge protection and better grounding. So those are two things there. Also adding the network equipment to the circuit. She also said that there were like 17 other locations in the home that were not being powered by the generator that she considered critical to use. So clearly she was having just electrical issues in general. We decided, because most of the Sonos had already been replaced, there are just one or two that need to be upgraded, we were going to do that for her. So we're speccing new Sonos there. We're going to, replace that, and that'll eliminate the loopback situation by just having those be wired. And Tim had been on site and said, this wiring is just totally nonsensical. Like some of it, there's a Sonos where the two Sonos boxes are plugged into each other, but plugged into nothing else. There's devices that are supposed to be wired that are wireless only. There's obviously the ones that should have been replaced with wired capable devices that aren't. So it's just a total mess. So he says we basically need to go back for another full day, unplug all the Sonos, make sure the wiring is properly labeled, and then just make sure there's a single cable going from a switch to the Sonos. Once these are all wired in and we've got them upgraded where they will support the wired connection or Wi-Fi direct as opposed to Sonos Net, then we can turn off this Wi-Fi on these Sonos devices that shouldn't have it turned on. That's going to fix the loopback issue. So we finally have a plan of attack there. That's the update on this whole situation where I really don't like to point my finger at some other vendor or partner of ours or just another service provider. But in this case, we really just had to point to the electrician and say, these are three things that he was supposed to do, that he said he was going to do, and that he said he did do that didn't get done, which then caused us all kinds of hand wringing over, did we screw up? Why is this still unstable? Why is this not getting power in a power outage? All just things that were literally just things he was supposed to have handled. So yeah, it was a positive update on our side, but it took a lot to get there. And it was we had to RMA one of the mission critical switches, got it back from UniFi, plugged it in. Now it's fine.
So where are you exactly in the project now? Has all the wiring been satisfied? All these 17 points now on the generator backup, or is there still work to be done? And just out of my own curiosity, is she going with a team of electricians or still that solopreneur? The new
She had the solo new electrician do the wiring for that one location, which is obviously critical,
the
the
rack
network
closet.
location.
Yeah. Hmm.
Exactly. I think she still has to do all those other locations. I think what she said was, this guy's great, but he's like fitting me in. And so this other team, they have so many people that they'd probably be a bit a better longer term fit to say, like for ongoing needs over the course of years, but
Hmm.
they'll probably be the ones she hires to do like those other locations and add the surge protection, things like that.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Wow.
So yeah, we need to spec the new Sonos devices and schedule Tim to go back there to basically just improve the Sonos side of things. This also brought up, I wanted to know if you had seen this article. It's pretty eye-opening, and I'm surprised I hadn't encountered this before. It's from UniFi. It's called Understand and Mitigate Network Loops, parentheses STP. So you can probably find it by saying Understand and Mitigate Network Loops. We can link to it in the show notes as well. But it's explaining the best practices that we all figured out through talking to our colleagues in the Mac admin Slack and through trial and error and things. But basically, it's so they talk about best practices to avoid network loops. It makes sense, and they illustrate some topology and things about how to do that and how to use STP to mitigate loops as well. And the point of STP is that when a loop is detected, a loopback that would otherwise crush your network,
Hmm.
STP says this shouldn't be happening and it shuts down that port. Where this comes into play with Sonos is that Sonos has these modes where, it doesn't remember that, oh, I have a wired connection and I should be providing wireless over Sonos net to a wireless only Sonos device. Sometimes what happens is it will pick up the Sonos net from a different Sonos device that's providing a Sonos net like wireless connection. And then therefore it'll say, I'll just offer this connection to the wired network. And the wired network happens to be plugged into the rest of your network on the
Hmm.
port that's built into the Sonos. Now, ideally, if you have two Sonos plugged into each other and one is getting a wireless connection to the Sonos net and it's providing a wired connection to another Sonos box, that should be fine. But if you have either of those also plugged into your network, then you have all kinds of issues. And in theory, there's ways of setting the STP priority to prevent that issue from causing the port to be disabled or from it causing it a loop essentially. But the better way to mitigate that seems like to just make sure again that you have the connections plugged into the right places and no extraneous wireless or wired connections essentially. So that's one article that I thought was pretty interesting. And then going further in the realm of Sonos specifically, they give you some very clear best practices. So if Sonos devices are wired, number one, ensure all Sonos devices are wired. None should be connected via Wi-Fi. Okay, so it used to
Hmm.
be possible to turn off Wi-Fi on the Sonos, on the older ones, in the app, exactly. And so Tim said he did that. He went through one by one, turned them off. What happens is if you have a single Sonos that needs a wireless connection, they just like spontaneously re-enable Wi-Fi on all the Sonos devices. So it seems to be a change that they made at some point, but that was
Hmm.
definitely creating tons of problems for us. They say use the same network in VLAN for all Sonos devices. Makes sense. Connect all Sonos devices to the same switch if possible. That's interesting too. Disable Sonos Net and Wi-Fi on all Sonos devices. So if you didn't catch that already, they're reiterating that basically you need to disable both Sonos Net Wireless and Wi-Fi on all the Sonos devices. They say do not daisy chain Sonos devices together using the same LAN port on a UniFi switch. Also very interesting because a lot of AV installers will do exactly that. You've got,
Hmm.
hey, all we need is one wire in this location. They just plug that into the switch, into the first Sonos device, and then they daisy chain like 5 more Sonos bridge devices or whatever, or amps into that one port. And that's not best practice. So you heard it right directly from UniFi. They also recommend setting STP priorities on your switches. I don't think that's necessary if you have all of them wired in the way that they're describing here. So then they say if Sonos devices are wireless, ensure that all Sonos devices are wirelessly connected. Do not wire any into your network. And again, this is something that our colleagues have mentioned. People have figured this out through trial and error, maybe talking to Sonos and just sussing out the best practices. But UniFi is telling you directly, ensure all Sonos devices are wireless. Do not wire any. So it's either all wired or all wireless. They say if SonosNet is in use for legacy speakers, ensure the 2.4 gigahertz channel used by SonosNet does not overlap with any existing 2.4 gigahertz Wi-Fi managed by UniFi. So that makes sense. This will create unnecessary interference and degrade overall performance on the Wi-Fi. They recommend using SonosNet on channels 1, 6, and 11. Essentially, you can ensure that either you have your Sonos Net on channel 1 and then UniFi is on channel 6, or vice versa, that kind of thing. So you want to avoid that interference between them, just like you do over normal 2.4 gigahertz Wi-Fi. So hopefully that's going away. I think supporting Sonos Net is part of the big problem there.
Now, I thought best practice, and not specifically with UniFi, to solve a lot of problems. As a matter of fact, Sam jobbed me out last year, the year 18 months ago, to show up at a therapy building or a physical therapist building, right? Where they were working with different clients in a big open space. And it was to have one Sonos device wired via Ethernet and then the rest wireless. That's not the conventional wisdom anymore?
So I think that's the conventional wisdom if you are still supporting older Sonos devices that
yes,
use
these
Sonos
were older.
Net. So the distinction is, if they're using Sonos Net because they're older, and that's the method of connecting by, like, they call it's wireless, but it's not Wi-Fi in particular. It's like a Sonos proprietary
I'm familiar with that. Yeah.
Just, for the listeners as well. But so you would basically have one Sonos
I thought you were
device.
schooling me there.
So one Sonos box would be wired in, which would then be broadcasting Sonos Net, which then makes its own mesh to the rest of the devices. But the problem is exactly what you said. If you have another device that's wired in, now it's getting like the Sonos Net from over here.
Yeah, you can't do that.
You can't do that. Right, exactly.
I've dealt with medical offices where they were, of all the places to like giving you pushback on spending money. And they got the older, the series, whatever it was called, the original Sonos that were black body. Yeah. And they don't want to buy new ones. And we would just be jerking around with these. So frustrating. It's the people with the most money who don't want to spend.
Who don't want to spend it. And it's,
except for your client there who's buying all kinds of stuff.
I know. And even then, no amount of new hardware spend budget solved her issues when you have somebody that's just wiring things wrong. And how frustrating. The thing about that is they'll often say it was working fine. It's not working fine anymore. And I can't support it.
It worked before.
Yeah. And now Sonos is going through this right now. They're in the news because they made some update to the app that doesn't support the older devices. And wasn't it their CEO or somebody who came out and said, sorry to say, we can't just roll it back because it basically deployed new firmware to all this hardware. And
I'm not intimately familiar with the nuance of it, but a big bone of contention with this whole Sonos thing that happened was that people's connected libraries, they couldn't connect to the library anymore. Like on an external drive. For some reason, it wasn't showing. And we use Sonos here in the downstairs area, but we're not doing that. We're streaming other ways, but we're not relying on Sonos, some sort of a drive being dovetailed off of a Sonos amp.
Remember Sonos used to run their own like SMB instance, or then later they would walk the client through enabling SMB to share the music library over the network.
That's what broke. That pathway to an SMB drive. For whatever, and people.
But good riddance. That's just another security hole to have SMB running managed by Sonos or something.
People went haywire. People just lost their minds over that.
Yeah, because it was working, and then they're not wrong. I didn't change anything. Like this was working, and now you don't support it anymore. What the heck,
and so for us, nothing broke. It just the app looked different. So what? Everything still worked, but boy, it was. They're going to study that in business school.
Yeah, exactly.
How they handled that, or how they mishandled it. I don't even. I'm sorry. I don't think it's even resolved at this point.
No, that's the latest I know as well. And don't you think they would have metrics on how many people is this change going to piss off? Because we have 100,000 people relying on music streaming this way, and they're in the middle of a dinner party right now. And then Sonos updates and it doesn't work. Yeah, what a nightmare. But I should be so lucky that my clients are willing to buy the new equipment at least. Because every once in a while, the hardware is working, but it's just not supported anymore. So you just have to buy a new one, and you're going to get these. It's going to be faster. It's going to result in a more stable network. And sometimes they get it, but they don't always get it. And yeah,
Mhm.
that can be very frustrating for people.
Yeah.
What's new in your world, Jerry, with client just sales process and client jobs and things?
Yeah, trying to shake the tree. It's picked up a little bit at the end of August.
Mhm.
So the work is coming in. I think as we approach this, you always look for reasons, right? When you're slow. Maybe it's the election, maybe it's the inflation rate.
Yeah.
Maybe it's the Fed. If the Fed moves a quarter of a point, all of a
Right.
sudden somebody's going to have trouble with their computer, right?
Yeah. Or be willing to pay
Um,
to fix their computer. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. I'm exploring and I'm going to share all my gory details as we truck down this, but I actually implemented this past week is I did something I said I would never do. And I've talked about it on previous shows for years previous to Google restricting their policy for advertising for computer support, which you can't do now. I used to advertise on Google and I was organically coming up well, and I still do in Google organic search, but I would buy Google
Yep.
ads
Right.
and I would get traction from that. And I wouldn't spend a lot of money. I'd spend a lot of money to me. I'd spend $300 a month, maybe
Hmm.
tops. Because I always said, like, one job is going to pay for that. And
That's right.
maybe it'll pay for a couple of months.
Yeah.
So I did the thing that I never said I would do, or I said that I would never do. And I'm advertising on Facebook ads and
Oh,
Instagram.
interesting. Okay.
Yeah. So I'm capping my budget to, I think it's $150 for the month.
Okay.
I always firmly believe that a lot of times when I tried it once and
Yeah.
I thought that a lot of the metrics that they were giving me, the page impressions, the engagement, I just thought it was all jive, you
Mm.
know. And I think that was with Instagram clicking or an Instagram ad. So I think they've gotten a little bit better. Meta,
Okay.
they've got a Meta app that
Mm.
steps up, and there's an ad manager. So they're very much in line with how Google runs their managing of ads. And all this stuff is really complicated. We would love to think that doing what we do, we could look at this dashboard and in an hour we could figure it out. But
Yeah.
there's so many dials, and there's so many buttons, and there's so
Wow.
many different settings. I'm giving it a try just to see if we get any kind of interest at all. But
Anything yet?
th-
Anybody like shaking the tree at all, or bringing you up?
no, it's a Thursday, and I just started it a couple days ago. The thing
Gotcha.
I am getting is, though, private messages where
Mhm.
they're telling me I'm in violation of some sort of a copyright or an image thing, and takedown notices that says that they're from Meta or they're from Facebook, and you need to respond in clicking through. Just
Uh,
it's rife with scam
Scams.
artists reaching out to you privately,
So
and
they
and.
see your ad and they just reach out to
Mhm.
you to say you're in violation. Wow.
Yeah, and they message
Ugh.
you. And a lot of it, a few of them, once you got the hang of it, you
Yeah.
realize that they were all scammy. But a few I had to run through on Reddit and just
Yeah.
do a
You
double
never
check
know.
on it. Yeah,
Yeah, imagining you're using some Apple related wording, Apple Consultants Network, MacWorks. These are things you have the right to use, but yeah, they may be coming at you and trying to like trick you into thinking that you're not
mhm,
allowed to do that, that you need to
sure.
click through and approve something. So I'm curious, like when you go to set up one of these ads, what are some of the sort of questions you have to answer, or like how do you target it? Are you using keywords like residential or business or
Yeah,
and
so
yeah,
no, it doesn't. With
okay.
Google marketing, you would do that, but we're not allowed to advertise. There's no way around it. And if you see ads for people saying that they're doing computer support, some of that is where you'll land on like a question and answer page.
Yeah.
I don't know, you've probably seen these for get your tech support questions answered. And it's just
Yeah.
a thinly guised, because the stipulation is if you're charging for support, you can't advertise. But if you're giving
Okay.
away free support, that's
Right.
something to hold. And then the other
Okay.
thing is sometimes you'll see ads fall through the cracks for computer support, and
Sure.
eventually they'll get a takedown from Google. In no uncertain terms, you can't advertise for any services at all
Wow.
on Google. And that's where the keywords would come into play. With Facebook and Instagram, it's simply creating a visual ad that has,
Okay.
information that you're an Apple support specialist. And so you really can't do any kind of keyword stuffing or just a brief description, call to action phrases, that sort of thing. And there's a little bit of AI built into it as you construct your ads. So they'll come up with alternating calls to action for you that you can use. So in some ways, it's a little bit less sophisticated than Google, but in other ways, how you can target. But then you can select, in my case, Connecticut. You can say within 25 miles of New Haven, 25 miles within Bridgeport. You could, I think the most you can expand it out to is to 50 miles from a target location. And you can demographically set it. In our case, we want to go like 18 to 65 and plus. So that's how you could dial it down. You could dial it down in your region. And it's just really how eye-catching your ad might look like.
Can you target like Apple users specifically? Obviously, Instagram knows that. Okay.
Yes.
Nice.
Yep. That's another thing too. People who are running Apple mobile devices, they obviously can't tell. Pretty sure they can't tell if you're on a Mac computer, but people who are Apple, their interest lies in Apple. So there's these little settings where you can say, what are your interests, or what are your target audience, what are their interests? You could put in Star Wars memorabilia or whatever.
Yeah, interesting. Okay. I love it. Yeah, that's great. That should definitely bring you some leads for sure to new business. It will eventually. You got a month. You got a month.
You're very optimistic.
$50 for the month. You're bound to get a few viable clients out of that.
That's what I like about you, Joe. You always look at the glass as being half full.
Yeah.
It's real hard to deal with clients. You're always like,
man.
Maybe I'll just go back and
maybe I can change them. I can help. I can fix them.
Yeah, it's like the abusive spouse thing where you're in this downward spiral, and I know I can fix things.
Right.
If I make the dinner just a little bit better.
See, you've been very effective at this because your voice is in my head now. When one of these clients comes up and I'm like, I know better, but I'm thinking like maybe it'll work out, and I'm considering, and I say no, Jerry wouldn't let me take this client on. So Jerry's just gonna scold me on the podcast. So I better avoid it at all costs.
New T-shirt. What would Jerry do?
What would Jerry do? Yeah. I think if the ad doesn't work, you can always have it pop up a banner, Apple security alert, your iCloud is hacked, your storage is full, your data will stop syncing if you don't click here and call MacWorks, right? You could just kind of
some of those better techniques that we've seen.
They work.
On the internet.
They work.
They sure do.
Yeah. Oh man.
Yeah. So fingers crossed. But I'm not expecting too much, and that's why I set the budget to be like half of what I would do with Google. So I still advertise on Google Ads for the Daylight reseller website. So you can sell software. You can't. Interestingly, I hassled with Google on another issue. You couldn't offer. There was a time when Daylight was a free trial. And they're no longer a free trial, but you can't, and I don't know why this is, but you can't advertise for software that has a free trial. Wow. Because they think people are going to sign up and then, or whatever.
Forget. Yeah. I mean, obviously there's just too many scams, and these are the things that people were leveraging to scam people out of. I feel like it's still happening though. Don't people Google for printer help and they stumble into some scam, or they try to search for antivirus and they get the fake McAfee or whatever? Don't they? Maybe they're just slipping in and catching a few people before they get blocked, maybe.
Yeah, I'm sure they have a police force, a Facebook police force or a Google police force. There's only so many people you could hire. But of course, the little guys are the ones who run with their tail between their legs like me.
Yeah.
And your Cavalier King Charles, which, by the way, you haven't held up for the show. Could you get, what's his name? Scrambly? Tumballoose. I thought it was Scrambly.
He's a little puppy nephew.
And we had a false start earlier in the show. Right. And I asked you if you were going to eat that dog for supper, if that was actually supper.
That was good.
And you had told me, no, that wasn't the case.
Yeah, he's
okay, that's good.
He's way too good for that. No,
he looks delicious though.
Yeah, other dogs I would eat, but yeah. Oh man. Speaking of the news and all, I heard this great podcast about podcasting. So I thought you'd be interested in this, Jerry. It's this show called On the Media. It's by WNYC, our local there in New York City public radio NPR affiliate. They have a few great podcasts. I highly recommend a show called The Brian Lehrer Show. He's just, as people call him when they call in, he's a national treasure. This guy's been doing it for I've been listening to over 20 years, and he's
Wow.
just a fantastic show, and just very as even and unbiased as you can possibly be. As they say, the I think reality has a liberal bias in a certain way, and so he follows that. But anyway, that's the Brian Lehrer Show. They also do Radio Lab. That's a very famous one that they
Sure.
produce. On the Media is a great one, and they did an episode recently about podcasting. And they talked about, so this was what I thought was really interesting in our world was Steve Jobs at the All Things Digital conference in 2005. He talked, this is when they made the announcement that Apple was basically, I think, starting the podcasting directory. He called podcasting Wayne's World for radio.
That's right. I remember that.
That was a really, I'd forgotten about that quote. And I thought it was a really amazing quote. It's like when we started the show and people said it's a bunch of high school guys talking about how everything's cool or something like that.
That's right.
So it's just great. It's Wayne's World for radio. So they were talking about the history.
Now we're old guys talking about it.
Yeah,
how
now
everything's
we're old
cool.
guys saying everything's cool. Exactly. It is pretty interesting, though, how resilient podcasting has been to what Cory Doctorow calls the enshittification of the internet, of how everything is just becoming like inundated with advertising, really heavy-handed. Like you go to a news site and you've got a streaming video and a banner ad and then a pop-up and there's one line of news on the whole thing. And it's just the whole internet is going that way. And meanwhile, podcasting has been surprisingly resilient to that, surprisingly resistant to that kind of trend. And part of it is Apple's pretty much being a pretty good steward of podcasting, I would say, by continuing to publish this podcast directory for free. It used to be the iTunes podcasting. Now it's an Apple podcast directory. Their incentives are mostly aligned with podcasters. Like they basically want to promote good shows and they're not taking any money from that. I guess that may be different now that they have the ability to follow a show in podcasting. We haven't played with that, but you can have early releases where people sign up to get your show and then maybe Apple takes a cut. I'm not really sure about that part. But one thing that's changing this year, it seems like there's much less money going into advertising on podcasts. We haven't really ever made that our primary source of revenue, but we've noticed that as well. And they're saying on this episode of On the Media that less ad money means fewer podcasts. And maybe that's not a bad thing. It probably means there's unfortunately fewer good podcasts in a certain way, because it means that there's less money to produce the content. There's less money to have a whole team around it. We're just a scrappy upstart that's been going for 11 plus years. We don't rely on revenue in the tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars to have a team of producers and this and that. Jerry produces the episodes. Sam, Jerry, and I record every week. Our costs are Libsyn for posting the content, Squarespace for the website, Patreon for running our membership, but it's relatively low overhead compared to a massive show on the Media or Radio Lab and things like that. So anyway, just I thought interesting in the scope of podcasting on a meta level, and it's just another podcast I could highly recommend, the On the Media podcast.
Yeah, I will
Your
definitely
thoughts,
check that
Jerry?
out. Yeah, my thoughts are yes, there will be less heavily produced podcasts unless they can be subsidized and underwritten by some of those benefactors that we hear on public TV.
Yeah, tons.
Rockefeller Foundation or whatever. But I think podcasts revenue, the revenue stream has been down for a number of years.
Yeah.
Leo Laporte, who was pretty active in our area for a number of years with podcasts and had a whole network for a while. And he still does, but he's downsized a couple times and now he's working out of his attic. So he sold his big production building that he spent hundreds of thousands of dollars to outfit it and get it ready for other internet shows. And now he's in his attic. I'm sure it's a really nice attic. So I think the money's going away. And there was a rush, like a gold rush, for everybody to want to buy 2 turntables and a microphone and put out something. But I think the podcast itself taps into something in the human psyche where there's always going to be people who want other people to listen to them, possibly because they want to express their opinion, or there's a lot of narcissism involved. Not a lot, but some.
Present company excluded.
Of course. In podcasting in general, I think we do it as we don't have that water cooler. We have already talked about the water cooler. We don't have that water cooler that we can all sidle up to and talk about the client, the sales call that we made the other day where we either got a good sale or lost a good sale. So this is our water cooler of sorts. And hopefully the people who listen, I know I'm droning on now, listen to us vicariously and say, yeah, that happened to me. Great. I really identify with that, or something that you talked about last week. So I don't think podcasts are going away, but that is a very valid point, that the ones that are elaborately produced, there will probably be less of them. But the crap podcasts like ours will always be there.
Yeah, we're not going anywhere, guys.
No.
Yeah. And I think we serve a good role like you described. We're the water cooler. We're kind of a public water cooler where we're sharing with each other, but then other people can also gain from that by hopefully maybe just recognizing and remembering that we talked about an issue that they're now facing, or just to commiserate with some of the issues we all deal with. And it brings the community together in a certain way. And we bring, vendors, colleagues to the platform as well. Anything you want to say about the recent Apple announcements, Jerry? I know you love to talk about the cutting edge news when the show comes out a month later, but
I get this vicarious
feedback.
Sure. I get this vicarious thrill hearing you justify what new iPhone you need to buy as soon as the announcement is made. So that's what I hope you might regale us with, a few minutes of justifying why you need the Pro Max, Joe. Even though you bought a phone last year, why you need a new phone this year.
I will trade my previous phone in for whatever it's worth and get the new Pro. I don't want the Max. I want to go back to the regular size Pro, which is something like 0.2 inches larger. So that's going to be one of my reasons for upgrading, is to actually downsize in terms of the size, and not for not too much money based on what my 1-year-old phone is still worth. And so that's one thing. I did think, so this is a great opportunity just to mention the Tidbits Content Network, of course. They put out some great content. I think it was the day after Apple's announcements. We all have content we can share with recommendations and kind of a recap of those announcements that we can send to our clients as if it were our opinion. And you can edit it to this extent that you want to tailor it to your clientele. One of the things here's a recap of the AirPods Pro 2 that I thought was a really exciting announcement actually from Apple. So this is right from Tidbits Content Network. Perhaps even more interesting are the changes Apple's bringing to the existing AirPods Pro 2. To improve hearing health, Apple has leveraged findings from the Apple Hearing Study. All models now feature hearing protection, which automatically reduces loud or intermittent noises. A new hearing test feature triggered from an iPhone or iPad helps users check their hearing. That I thought was really interesting, because just anecdotally, from what I've noticed, I feel like there are people around me that have hearing issues that,
What?
Right on cue. That's good. I don't know that I've had a hearing test, and I'm sure I don't have perfect hearing. Like, I've been to some loud rock shows in my day, and I talk on the phone all day with AirPods in my ear. I just wonder how my own hearing is, for that matter. So it'd be really interesting to be able to get a clinical grade hearing test, basically. So you can do the hearing test. You can then use the hearing aid feature, leverages the personalized profile generated from the hearing test to boost nearby sounds, turning the AirPods Pro into what Apple calls a, quote, clinical grade hearing aid for mild to moderate hearing loss. And these features will be available later this year with an update.
So that AirPods Pro 2 is not a new product that they released. It's been out. Just want to throw that out there. And what you're mentioning is really exciting news, because last October, the FDA said that you could sell over-the-counter hearing aids. So Apple's stepping up into that space. So it potentially could be a real game changer. But of course, that software is still yet to be released. But let me ask you something. You wear AirPods all day. I wear AirPods sometimes during calls. But do you ever feel like, when you're on a new call or something like that, and you really want to do a lean in, that there's nothing better than just doing it like this?
For the listeners, Jerry's holding his phone up to his ear.
Yeah.
like we used to do back in the
like old
50s.
school.
Like,
Yeah,
yeah.
an old guy
But
would.
yeah, or it's better than, as Sam calls it, the slice of pizza, where they hold it in front and they it's
Yeah.
like on
They're
speakerphone for
talking to
everyone to hear. Yeah.
talking to the slice
Like,
of pizza. Yeah.
oh man, I feel like the quality of the AirPods is very good. I usually use one in my ear, so I
Mhm.
alternate. I just, because I don't want to wear out one ear basically, and it just gives a little bit of relief versus having one ear all day. I think that works perfectly fine for me in terms of the latency. I think is low enough. Call quality is fine. Volume is fine. The issue I have is when clients are using a speakerphone, as I've complained
Mhm.
about millions of times on the show by now, where they both can't hear you either validating what they're saying or trying to jump in to something they said to say, "Oh, that's interesting. Let's pursue that question or conversation related to your issue as it may be." It's very disruptive when they are on speakerphone. But I don't find that. What do you think is the appeal of holding the phone to your ear?
I'm just talking about, what do the kids say? You when you really want to crush it, when you're really making a deal. It's like your first pitch. So it's
Okay.
not like a casual
Yeah.
making a support call, but you're talking to somebody for the first time and you probably have your eyes closed. I know I would.
Yeah.
And you're listening and you're just like making that connection. I don't know. I don't know. There's
Interesting. Yeah.
something really psychological about it. Like when I feel
Oh,
like I really need to dig in,
yep.
and it's not always, but I'll go with the old school.
It's almost like you're describing a certain form of like intimacy. It's you're right there with them. Part of that is the holding of the phone up to your
Mhm.
face. And it's like the
Right.
speaker is right there and the mic is right there. And it's
You're probably
your,
holding it too tight, just really
right.
gripping the phone really
Yeah.
hard. Yeah, I don't know,
Maybe
like
it's,
for a cold call or somebody who I would just get an email and says, "We were interested in having you tell us about your computer services." I almost
Mhm.
would like default to that. It's crazy.
Interesting. I'm the opposite. I like to have my
Mhm,
hands free so I can type. I like to also get up and walk around sometimes. If I'm trying to like really focus on what I'm saying or what they're
mhm.
saying, I might close my eyes like you're describing just to really focus in on that. But almost always with AirPods and
Okay.
AirPods Pro, maybe I don't know if that makes a difference in this case, but yeah, so that's a really interesting point. I've also thought about advising clients not to hold their phone up to their ear. Like someday I might do a newsletter post or something like that where this would be a topic where I actually don't think it's great in terms of radiation,
Oh,
like
here we go.
cellular, Bluetooth, all that stuff.
Tinfoil hat.
Probably not Bluetooth, but cellular radiation. You think about a device that has to broadcast a signal at whatever, a mile away or
Space. In
something. Yeah.
space.
Or space. It's got satellite connectivity in there too. Exactly. I don't want that space antenna next to my brain. Then again, I stick a Bluetooth in my ear. So maybe that's worse in
Yeah.
some ways and better in other ways. But I just don't think it's a great idea to just be holding your phone up to your ear. I think wired earbuds are probably better than that. And they're probably also better than wireless AirPods. It's just for the convenience of the AirPods, it's well worth it to me. So
Mhm,
that's
mhm.
my spiel. But I did think the hearing features were really interesting, especially since we've been talking about the people are doing
Yep.
this already. We've talked
Mhm.
about it yep, and just even using them as I actually heard on the ATP podcast, Accidental Tech podcast, Marco Arment was talking about using the AirPods Pro as like earplugs for live music. And I've tried that as well. And they seem to
Mhm.
work. And I'm thinking, does it just sound like it's working, but it's actually still bad for my ears? Or do they actually have a positive effect on as an earplug? Are they reducing the volume of the sound that's actually hitting my eardrum? I have to
Mhm.
assume they are because my ears don't hurt as
Mhm.
much when I use them that way. Even just using them again casually as conversation boost with friends. So it's something people are already experimenting with, and I'm glad to see Apple actually releasing features that will be more forward facing and easier for clients to maybe get a handle on, and clinical grade, which is fantastic.
Agreed.
That's all I want to say about the recent Apple announcements, which maybe by the time you're hearing this, will not be so recent, but the feature will be out at some point soon. So yeah, looking forward to it.
Thanks
All
for
right,
listening,
Jerry.
folks.
Yeah.
You can find us on YouTube if you want to see us in all our glory. And we also have mentioned send us t-shirts and we'll wear your t-shirts on the camera
That's
and
right.
mention your company.
That's right. We certainly will. Thanks everybody for listening. See you, Jerry.
Jerry does his voices of customers of all kinds.
Am I on the cloud?
Joe spins his deeply detailed yarns all the time.
I have a whole story about this.
Sam is on the road again, phoning in from a hotel.
At least we know where I am.
Half a cent